Right now, we start this hour with this question. Can the President of the United States take control of independent federal agencies like the Federal Trade Commission? That is what justices on the high court are thinking about today. So the issue is before the court that the president's firing of former Federal Trade Commissioner Rebecca Slaughter needed to come into question. So Slaughter argues that Congress designed the Federal Trade Commission to be bipartisan in investigating corporate mergers and consumer fraud. Those arguments in court already heating up this morning. Listen in.
How about employees?
Again, we haven't challenged the restrictions on.
I know you haven't challenged it. It's really, the question is, where does this lead? What does it take you to, given what your primary rationale is? Employees are wielding executive power all over the place, and yet we've had civil service laws that give them substantial protection from removal for over a century.
Okay, so this is absolutely terrifying, and I mean this is really truly terrifying. We're talking about the Supreme Court hearing arguments about whether Trump can fire the heads of independent federal agencies. We're talking about a case that could fundamentally transform the structure of American government. We're talking about a potential ruling that could give Trump absolute power over every regulatory agency in the federal government. We're talking about the overturning of a 90-year-old precedent that has protected independent agencies from political interference. We're talking about the destruction of the system of checks and balances that has protected democracy for nearly a century. This is the kind of moment that historians will look back on and say, this is when everything changed. This is the moment when American government was fundamentally reshaped. This is the moment when we lost the protections that have kept this country democratic. And the Supreme Court is warning Trump about this. The Supreme Court is expressing serious concerns about what Trump is trying to do. The justices are asking tough questions. The justices are pointing out the dangers. The justices are worried about authoritarianism. The justices understand that what Trump is trying to do would fundamentally change American government. The justices understand that what Trump is trying to do would consolidate power in the hands of the president in a way that the founders never intended. The justices understand that this is dangerous. The justices understand that this could lead to the end of democracy as we know it. The justices are trying to warn us. The justices are sounding the alarm. The justices are saying, wait a minute, this is going too far. This is dangerous. This threatens everything we've built. On December 8, 2025, the Supreme Court heard arguments in a case that could fundamentally reshape American government. Trump's administration is challenging the Humphreys executor precedent from 1935. That's a 90-year-old ruling that says the president cannot fire the heads of independent federal agencies without cause. That ruling has been the foundation of the independent agency system for almost a century. That ruling has protected regulatory agencies from political interference. That ruling has allowed agencies like the Federal Reserve, the SEC, the EPA, and others to function with a degree of independence from political pressure. For 90 years, we've had a system where the president couldn't just fire whoever he wanted. This video is in paid partnership with Kalshi. Before we get deeper into today's Trump topic, I want to show you something that ties directly into it. My partner Kalshi is the largest legal prediction market in the US, and it lets you trade on real-world events. These are real money markets where you're trading against other people, like a stock market for events. Everything on Kalshi is a simple yes or no contract. If a contract is trading at 45 cents, that means the market thinks there's about a 45% chance of that outcome happening. If it resolves yes, it pays out $1 per contract, so entering at 45 cents more than doubles your money if you're correct. Since today's video is about Trump, I literally checked the Trump-related markets on Kalshi before filming just to see what people are trading on right now. You can build a position, scale in and out, and even earn interest on long-term trades before the market resolves. Kalshi is available in all 50 states, has over 1 million users, and has facilitated billions in trades. If you want to try it, Kalshi is giving you $20 when you trade $100. You can go to my partner link, https://kalshi.com/playersunlimited, and use code playersunlimited when you sign up. Thanks to my partner Kalshi, and now back to the video.
He's been listening closely to all these arguments. What have you heard so far, Ellie?
Well, Wolf, it's going very well for the Trump administration so far. So the arguments are still ongoing, but the battle lines here have been drawn very clearly. The court's 6 conservative justices clearly seem to agree with the Trump administration's position that the president is the head of the executive branch and therefore can fire agency heads for any reason he wants. However, the 3 liberal justices strongly oppose that. They've been essentially arguing through their questions that Congress passed a law saying the president can only fire those agency heads for good cause, for poor performance on the job or other bad conduct. However, the numbers are the numbers here, and it seems that conservatives are making a strong case here that the president should have the power, notwithstanding a long-standing precedent that the president should have the power to choose to remove those agency heads from the FTC and other similar agencies, really for any reason he wants.
For 90 years, we've had independent agencies that could enforce the law based on what the law says, not based on what the president wants. And now all of that is under attack. But Trump wants to overturn that. Trump wants the power to fire anyone who stands in his way. Trump wants the power to fire Federal Reserve officials if they don't cooperate with his economic policies. Trump wants the power to fire SEC commissioners if they don't approve his preferred regulatory approach. Trump wants the power to fire EPA officials if they don't allow his environmental policies. Trump wants unchecked power over every federal agency. Trump wants the ability to fire anyone who disagrees with him. Trump wants absolute control. Trump is saying I should be able to fire anyone I want whenever I want for any reason. I should have total control. No agency should be independent of me. No one should be able to say no to me. This is the level of power Trump is demanding. And the case involves billions of dollars in SNAP payments and other regulatory matters. But the real issue is much bigger than that. The real issue is about the structure of American government. The real issue is about whether the president can have unlimited power to fire independent agency heads. The real issue is about whether checks and balances still exist in American government. The real issue is about whether Congress still has the power to create independent agencies with protection from political interference. The real issue is about whether we still have a system of separated powers or whether we're moving toward a system where the president has absolute control over the entire executive branch. This is not about one regulatory decision. This is about the foundation of democratic government itself. And Trump's team is being very clear about what they want. Trump's team is arguing that the president should have the power to fire anyone who stands in his way. Trump's team is arguing that independent agencies should not exist. Trump's team is arguing that the president should have complete control over every executive agency. Trump's team is arguing that the 90-year-old precedent protecting independent agencies should be overturned. And they're making these arguments directly to the Supreme Court. They're asking the Supreme Court to overturn a fundamental protection that has existed for nearly a century. They're asking for the power to destroy something that has protected this country for generations. They're asking for the power to transform American government into something unrecognizable. But the justices are warning about this. The justices are expressing concern. The justices are asking questions about what this would mean for democracy. The justices are pointing out that independent agencies have protected markets, protected consumers, protected the environment, and protected the rule of law from political interference. The justices are warning that overturning this precedent could lead to the politicization of every federal agency. The justices are warning that this could turn federal agencies into tools of the president instead of independent bodies that serve the public interest. The justices are saying, hold on, if we do this, if we allow the president to fire anyone, if we eliminate independent agencies, what does that mean for our government? What does that mean for democracy? What have we just destroyed? And here's what's really terrifying about this moment. The ruling is expected in spring 2026. That's after the midterm elections. That's after Trump's party has presumably expanded its control of Congress. That's when Trump could potentially appoint thousands of judges to positions. That's when Trump could stack the federal judiciary with loyalists. That's when Trump could consolidate his power completely. That's the timing here. That's when the Supreme Court will rule. And then, once the Supreme Court rules that Trump can fire independent agency heads, Trump could immediately replace them with loyalists. Trump could purge the entire federal government of anyone who disagrees with him. Trump could turn every federal agency into an extension of his will. The timing is not an accident. The timing is strategic. This ruling could come right when Trump is at peak power. And that's what Trump wants. Trump has been frustrated by judges saying no to him. Trump has been frustrated by regulators enforcing laws that he doesn't like. Trump has been frustrated by agency officials who won't cooperate with his policies. Trump has said over and over again, I should be able to do whatever I want. And now Trump is trying to get the Supreme Court to give him the power to fire all of them. Trump is trying to get the Supreme Court to dismantle the system of independent agencies. Trump is trying to get the Supreme Court to consolidate executive power in a way that the founders never intended. Trump is saying the Constitution gives me too little power. I need more power. I need absolute power. This is a power grab. This is an attempt to consolidate authoritarian control over the federal government. This is an attempt to destroy the system of checks and balances. This is an attempt to turn the United States government into a tool of the president instead of a government of laws. This is exactly what the founders were afraid of. This is exactly what the Constitution was designed to prevent. And the Supreme Court is warning Trump about this. The Supreme Court is expressing serious concerns. The Supreme Court understands that what Trump is trying to do is dangerous. The Supreme Court is saying, we see what you're doing, and we're worried. But here's the really scary part. Trump might win this case. Trump might succeed in overturning the Humphreys executive precedent. Trump might get the Supreme Court to rule that he can fire independent agency heads. And if that happens, if Trump wins, then American government will never be the same. If that happens, if Trump wins, then the president will have absolute power over the executive branch. If that happens, if Trump wins, then we will no longer have a system of separated powers. If that happens, if Trump wins, then we will have moved toward authoritarianism. If that happens, if Trump wins, then democracy as we know it will effectively be over. That's not hyperbole. That's what's at stake here. Alright, so let's dig into what's really happening here, because this is not just about one case. This is not just about one ruling. This is about the fundamental structure of American government and whether it will survive Trump's assault on it. This is about 90 years of legal precedent and whether it will be overturned. This is about whether independent agencies can continue to exist or whether they will be destroyed. This is about whether Congress still has the power to create independent bodies or whether the president now has unlimited control. This is about the future of American democracy itself, and I want to break down exactly what's happening and why it matters so much. I want to explain why this is the most important case the Supreme Court is hearing right now. I want to show you what happens if Trump wins. I want to show you how this changes everything. Let's start with the Humphreys executor precedent. In 1935, the Supreme Court ruled that the president cannot fire the heads of independent federal agencies without cause. The case involved President Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who wanted to fire a commissioner of the Federal Trade Commission. The Supreme Court said no. The Supreme Court ruled that Congress has the power to create independent agencies and to protect them from political interference. The Supreme Court ruled that the president cannot simply fire agency heads whenever he disagrees with them. This was a landmark ruling. This was the Supreme Court saying, the president doesn't have unlimited power. Congress has the power to create independent bodies that are protected from political pressure. This was a fundamental protection for democracy. This was a guarantee that the federal government wouldn't just become an extension of the president's will. That ruling has been the foundation of the independent agency system for nearly 90 years. That ruling has protected regulatory agencies from political interference. That ruling has allowed agencies to enforce the law based on what the law says, not based on what the president wants. That ruling has protected agencies from becoming tools of political parties or individual presidents. That ruling has been crucial to the functioning of democratic government in America. Without this ruling, without this protection, the federal government would be completely different. Federal agencies wouldn't be independent. They would be tools of whoever is president, and that's what Trump wants to change. Independent agencies regulate the financial system. Independent agencies protect the environment. Independent agencies protect workers. Independent agencies protect consumers. Independent agencies protect public health. Independent agencies manage the national forests and parks. Independent agencies oversee transportation safety. And all of these agencies have been able to function with a degree of independence because of the Humphreys executor precedent. All of these agencies have been able to enforce laws based on what the law says, not based on what the president wants. All of these agencies have been protected from political retaliation for making decisions the president doesn't like. This protection has allowed agencies to do their jobs. This protection has allowed agencies to enforce the law impartially. This protection has kept federal agencies from becoming pure political instruments. But Trump wants to overturn all of that. Trump wants to overturn the Humphreys executor precedent. Trump wants the power to fire any independent agency head whenever he wants for any reason. Trump wants the power to replace them with loyalists who will do what he wants. Trump wants the power to use federal agencies as tools of his political agenda. Trump wants the power to use federal agencies to punish his enemies and reward his allies. That's what Trump is asking the Supreme Court to allow. That's the power Trump is demanding. That's the fundamental transformation Trump is seeking. Now the case itself involves SNAP payments and other regulatory matters, but the real issue is much bigger. The real issue is about the fundamental structure of American government. The real issue is about whether the president can have unlimited control over the executive branch. The real issue is about whether independent agencies can exist or whether they must all answer directly to the president. The real issue is about whether Congress has the power to create independent bodies with protection from political interference. This case is a test of whether Congress can protect its own creations. This case is a test of whether separated powers still exist. This case is a test of whether the Constitution still means what it says. And Trump's team is making very aggressive arguments. Trump's team is arguing that the president should have the power to fire anyone in the executive branch for any reason. Trump's team is arguing that independent agencies should not exist. Trump's team is arguing that all federal agencies should answer directly to the president and should carry out the president's agenda. Trump's team is arguing that the 90-year-old precedent protecting independent agencies is wrong and should be overturned. And these are not subtle arguments. These are not careful legal arguments based on narrow technical points. These are broad arguments saying the president needs more power. These are arguments saying independent agencies are obstacles that need to be removed. And these arguments are dangerous. These arguments would fundamentally transform American government. These arguments would concentrate unprecedented power in the hands of the president. These arguments would eliminate one of the crucial checks on presidential power. These arguments would turn federal agencies into tools of the president instead of bodies that serve the public interest and enforce the law. This is not a debate about fine points of constitutional law. This is a debate about the basic structure of government. This is a debate about whether we live in a democracy or an autocracy. The Federal Reserve is a perfect example of why this matters. The Federal Reserve is an independent agency that controls monetary policy. The Federal Reserve has the power to set interest rates and manage inflation. The Federal Reserve is independent so that it can make decisions based on economic data and sound economic principles, not based on what the president wants for political reasons. If Trump could fire Federal Reserve officials, if Trump could replace them with loyalists, then Trump could use the Federal Reserve for political purposes. Trump could lower interest rates before elections to boost the economy, even if it meant causing inflation. Trump could manipulate monetary policy for political gain. That would be disastrous for the economy and for democracy. The Federal Reserve needs to be independent so it can do its job properly. If the president controls the Fed, then monetary policy becomes a tool of political power instead of a tool for economic management. And the same thing applies to every other independent agency. If Trump could fire SEC commissioners, he could prevent them from regulating Wall Street or his business interests. If Trump could fire EPA officials, he could prevent them from enforcing environmental laws. If Trump could fire officials at the Department of Justice, he could use it as a tool of political revenge. If Trump could fire everyone who disagrees with him, he could turn the entire federal government into a machine for carrying out his will. There would be no independent voices. There would be no one to say no to the president. There would be no checks on presidential power. The government would become an extension of Trump's personal will. And the Supreme Court understands this. The Supreme Court is warning about this. The Supreme Court is asking tough questions about what this would mean for American government. The justices are pointing out that independent agencies have important functions. The justices are pointing out that removing the protections for independent agency heads could lead to the politicization of the federal government. The justices are warning that this could lead to the destruction of the rule of law. The justices are saying, wait a minute, if we allow this, what happens next? What happens to democracy? What happens to the Constitution? The justices are trying to pump the brakes. The justices are expressing concern, but the justices might not be able to stop this. But Trump might win anyway. The Supreme Court is controlled by conservative justices, many of whom have expansive views of presidential power. The Supreme Court might rule that the president has the power to fire independent agency heads. The Supreme Court might overturn the Humphreys executor precedent. And if that happens, if Trump wins, then American government will be fundamentally transformed. Trump could immediately start firing independent agency heads and replacing them with loyalists. Trump could consolidate control over every regulatory agency. Trump could use federal agencies as tools of his political agenda. Trump could turn the federal government into an instrument of his will, and Congress would be powerless to stop him. Congress would have created independent agencies and given them protections, but the Supreme Court would have taken those protections away. Congress would be unable to protect its own creations from presidential interference. This is what authoritarianism looks like. This is how it happens. Okay, let's break down what this means. Because this is not just about one legal case. This is not just about whether Trump can fire independent agency heads. This is about the future of American democracy. This is about the future of the rule of law. This is about the future of separated powers. This is about the future of constitutional government in America. This is the most fundamental question we face as a country, and I want to explain exactly what's at stake and why this matters so much for all of us. Point 1. Trump is attempting a fundamental power grab. What Trump is trying to do is clear. Trump is trying to consolidate unprecedented power in the hands of the president. Trump is trying to overturn 90 years of precedent that protects independent agencies. Trump is trying to eliminate the ability of Congress to create independent bodies that are protected from political interference. Trump is trying to ensure that every federal agency answers directly to him and carries out his will without question. This is not about policy. This is not about whether Trump agrees or disagrees with particular regulations. This is about power. This is about Trump wanting more power than any president should have. This is about Trump wanting power that the Constitution doesn't give him. Trump is saying the Constitution doesn't give me enough power. The Constitution limits my power. I want the Constitution changed. I want my power unlimited. I want everyone in the government to answer to me. This is not about a particular policy disagreement. This is not about a particular regulation Trump doesn't like. This is about fundamental power. This is about whether the president can have absolute control over the executive branch. This is about whether the president can fire anyone who disagrees with him. This is about whether we still have a system of checks and balances or whether we've moved toward authoritarianism. This is about the future of democracy itself. This is the core question. This is what we need to focus on. Trump is not trying to win an election or change a policy. Trump is trying to change the fundamental structure of government. Trump is trying to consolidate dictatorial power. Point 2. The Supreme Court is warning about the dangers. The Supreme Court is expressing serious concerns about what Trump is trying to do. The justices are asking tough questions. The justices are pointing out that independent agencies have important functions. The justices are warning that removing protections for independent agencies could lead to the politicization of the federal government. The justices are worried about authoritarianism. The justices understand the dangers of what Trump is proposing. The justices are saying this is dangerous. This threatens democracy. This violates the Constitution. The justices are sounding the alarm. The justices are trying to warn us about what could happen. The justices are expressing real concern about Trump's power grab, but the justices might rule in Trump's favor anyway. The Supreme Court is controlled by conservative justices who have expansive views of presidential power. The Supreme Court might decide that the Humphreys executor precedent should be overturned. The Supreme Court might decide that the president should have the power to fire independent agency heads. And if that happens, if Trump wins, then the Supreme Court will have given Trump the power to consolidate authoritarian control over the federal government. The Supreme Court will have enabled authoritarianism. The Supreme Court will have destroyed a 90-year-old protection for democracy. That's the possibility we face. That's what could happen. Point 3. This would fundamentally transform American government. If Trump wins, if the Humphreys executor precedent is overturned, then American government will be fundamentally transformed. Trump could immediately start firing independent agency heads and replacing them with loyalists. Trump could consolidate control over the Federal Reserve. Trump could consolidate control over the SEC. Trump could consolidate control over the EPA. Trump could consolidate control over every regulatory agency in the federal government. Trump could use federal agencies as tools of his political agenda. Trump could turn the federal government into an instrument of his will. Trump could reshape the entire government to serve his personal interests. Trump could turn agencies that are supposed to protect the public into agencies that protect Trump and punish his enemies. This is what the end of democracy looks like. This is what authoritarianism looks like. And Congress would be powerless to stop him. Congress would have created these independent agencies and given them protections, but the Supreme Court would have taken those protections away. Congress would be unable to protect its own creations from presidential interference. Congress would be unable to prevent the politicization of the federal government. Congress would be unable to prevent the concentration of power in the hands of the president. Congress would be unable to do anything. Congress would be effectively eliminated as a co-equal branch of government. The president would have supreme power. The president would be above Congress. The president would be above the law. Point 4. This is how democracy dies. This is what authoritarianism looks like. This is how the rule of law gets destroyed. This is how the separation of powers gets dismantled. This is how power gets concentrated in the hands of one person. This is how democracies die. Not with a bang, but with a Supreme Court ruling that slowly transforms the structure of government. Not with a revolution, but with a legal decision that strips away protections we thought were permanent. Not with violence, but with constitutional arguments that eliminate checks on presidential power. This is how it happens. This is what we need to understand. This is what's at stake. Once Trump has the power to fire independent agency heads, once Trump has consolidated control over federal agencies, once Trump has turned them into instruments of his will, then democracy will effectively be over. Then the rule of law will effectively be over. Then the Constitution will effectively be meaningless, because the Constitution assumes a system of separated powers. The Constitution assumes that Congress has the power to create independent bodies. The Constitution assumes that the president cannot have unlimited power. But if Trump wins this case, if the Humphreys executor precedent is overturned, then all of those assumptions will be false. Then the Constitution will no longer protect democracy. Then the Constitution will no longer protect us. The bottom line: the Supreme Court is hearing a case that could fundamentally transform American government. Trump is trying to overturn a 90-year-old precedent that protects independent agencies from political interference. Trump is trying to consolidate power in the hands of the president. Trump is trying to eliminate the system of checks and balances. The Supreme Court is warning about the dangers. The Supreme Court is expressing concern about authoritarianism, but the Supreme Court might rule in Trump's favor anyway. That's the situation we face. That's what could happen. If Trump wins, if the Humphreys executor precedent is overturned, then American democracy will be at grave risk. Trump will have the power to fire independent agency heads and consolidate control over federal agencies. Trump will have the power to turn the federal government into a tool of his will. Trump will have consolidated unprecedented power, and the system of checks and balances that has protected American democracy for more than 200 years will have been dismantled. This is the moment that will determine whether American democracy survives or whether we descend into authoritarianism. This is the moment that will determine whether the Supreme Court protects the Constitution or whether it enables Trump's power grab. This is the moment that will determine the future of American government, and the stakes could not be higher. The stakes are nothing less than the survival of democracy itself. This is what we need to understand. This is what we need to pay attention to. This is what matters more than anything else right now.